Welcome, Wargamers, to a very special video where we're going to be talking about the Soul Wars, the announcement of the next chapter in the overarching narrative of Age of Sigmar has been revealed with the book Morathi coming out soon. I believe the actual name is Broken Realms, and I thought we could take a moment to recap all of the incredible events of the Soul Wars, a moment in Age of Sigmar history when the god of undeath himself, Nagash, made a power play to seize total control of the mortal realms. So without wasting any time, let's jump in at the beginning of it all. Now, if you're new to the story of Age of Sigmar, I published a earlier video in this series called The Story Thus Far, and so this is just kind of be the second chapter of that, but you can find a link to that video in my notes down below. Now, the last chapter, if you will, of the Age of Sigmar narrative was known as the Realm Gate Wars. And we don't actually know how much time had passed between the Realm Gate Wars and the Soul Wars, but we know it had to be a little while, because cities were growing and thriving, and colonists were spreading out, claiming territory for the forces of order that were lost during the Age of Chaos. The world is still incredibly dangerous, but on the whole, things were looking better. Hope had been sparked and now was beginning to burn. But, of course, then things started getting weird. Cattle started to die in droves or mutate, and crops began to yield strange fruit, and again, lots of mutations. Nightmares wrenched their way into the minds of just about every mortal. These collectively were the malign portents of things to come. You see, deep in the heart of Shyish, the realm of death, Nagash was putting the final touches on his great scheme. The plan was simple enough. Concentrate enough death magic in one place and channel it into a singular spell. You kill all the living, reanimate the dead, so all those people you just killed come back to life, in addition to all the spirits and, wayward souls throughout the realms. And Nagash is effectively king of an endless army, right? And he can personally drive chaos out of the realms. With everyone being dead, there's no mortals to, have wars to feed corn or fear about death to feed Nurgle and so on. So it actually kind of eliminates the things that fuel the chaos gods while creating simultaneously an army to fight them. To do this, Nagash constructed a black pyramid, which, if you're an old world fan, sounds very familiar. It's made of pure grave sand, which is essentially solidified death magic, far from the rim of Shyish. A lot of these realms, they all have kind of their own sort of concentrated magic towards the edges of the realm. Well, this massive structure was built to be a catalyst. So it's going to take all of that death magic, put it in one place, the dead center of the realm of Shyish, in a city called Nagashazar, and this culmination of all this concentrated magic in one place is what prompted all these signs and portents across the other realms. It's like reality was screaming that something is wrong. There was too much magic, it was too concentrated, and so it started to disturb the function of the cosmos. Now, I want to pause here in our story and say that this was the release of Malign Portals. It was a bolt-on campaign system where every Grand Alliance was trying to understand what's happening, right? No one had an idea of what Nagash was scheming, and so all we have is these weird disturbances across the realms, and these weird omens and portents. And players could scry the future from these visions and use them for effects in the game. And there's a whole host of totally free short stories that you should be reading, and I typically read them before bed, and I'll leave a link to those short stories down below. All of these visions were leading us towards something. Towards Nagash, towards Shyish, towards specifically the Black Pyramid. And the time finally came for Nagash to enact this great plan. It was centuries in the making that he's been building this thing. You can read about this in the first few chapters of the book Soul Wars by Josh Reynolds. As this thing was constructed, this Black Pyramid, the fabric of reality began to unravel. You see, magic in Age of Sigmar as a setting wasn't meant to be this concentrated. It defied the natural law of the realms, which given that it's already so extreme and crazy sometimes, is a kind of an out there idea. So Nagash begins his spell, but things go wrong from the get-go. You see, the Skaven have slipped into the Black Pyramid. It has channels and walls because it's very complicated, like, spell incantations were written along every corner of it. And the Skaven got in there because they were looking to, one, spy, because there's something going on in Shyish and they want to know about it, but secondly, they want to steal bits of it. Because Realmstone, what this Black Pyramid's made out of, is incredibly powerful and precious, and hey, here's a big storage unit of it, basically. And these Skaven honestly did two things that accidentally saved the world. First of all, they chiseled and clawed at the marks and sigils that were important to Nagash's spell. Secondly, they died inside of the Black Pyramid when Nagash went to go start what he was doing. And so they almost acted like a built-in contaminant. And that's a very interesting idea. So the intended effect that we mentioned before, kill everyone, raise all those same people up and more, all the dead everywhere, well, that didn't completely happen. The spell didn't work as intended. Everyone didn't die for the first part of it. But what did happen was also catastrophic. I'm not going to say equally catastrophic, but it was also really bad. A blast of pure death magic fired out from Nagashazar across the realms. It is a tidal wave of pure energy that hit every corner of existence. Long-forgotten souls of the ancient dead rose up. Some were skeletons, some were zombies, but most of them were Nighthaunt. In fact, this is the birth of the Nighthaunt, the spectral, ghosty boys, as a faction. An army raised in every part of the realms instantly and simultaneously. But Nagash quickly realized that even though he had raised, what is almost an endless army, he did not have immediate control over them. And so all of these ghosts just wandered around, causing an immense amount of havoc for everyone else. Soon after that, he took the soul of Lady Olander and instated her as the Mortarch of Grief, and basically delegated the authority of wrangling all these Nighthaunt into a new army. And so that's really when the Nighthaunt were born, is when Nagash realized that, I don't have instant control over every aspect of these guys. Well, then I'll delegate authority and get someone else to do that job. And then Lady Olander then organizes them into processions, and that's how we know the Nighthaunt. Now, the second thing that this spell did was fundamentally change the way magic works in the realms. You see, before, you'd cast a spell, and it would dissipate shortly afterwards. You'd throw a fireball at somebody, it would hit the target, and then it would just kind of fade off. But now, there's so much magic in the air because of that big tidal wave, sometimes spells don't go away. In the right conditions, these spells have just enough fuel and intensity to keep their form. Some of them even have a very, very limited form of sentience. And so they rip and tear across the mortal realms, and this is how we got endless spells in the game. Manifestations of magic with enough energy to propagate their own existence, so they roam around like wild animals. With no direction, no motive, they just go, and they're like these living wrecking balls. And I can't stress enough that this is an event that affected literally every faction in the game, of course some more than others. But if you look at your battle tome, no matter what army you play, there is some note or information about how they responded to the Necroquake, which is the name for that big shockwave. Right, cities and holds went from relative peace to full-on assault by undead and restless spirits overnight, with the Nighthaunt fading right in through any defenses presented to them. In addition to that, one little extra side note happened that even Nagash was stunned by, because the Necroquake, as it spread across the realms, began to reveal hidden locations. These became known as storm vaults. Locations where Sigmar, back in the Age of Myth, had stored monsters and weapons and artifacts that he could not allow to be free in the mortal realms, but he also couldn't destroy them. Like there was just something so powerful or intrinsic about them that even a god couldn't get rid of them, and so he hid them away. Well, these were being hidden by a machine called a penumbral engine, designed to conceal everything around them. And so these basically vaults full of weapons of incalculable power just became revealed to everyone, and they are everywhere. So now every faction, while all of this chaos is going on, is also clamoring to get their hands on some of these super weapons. All that to say, it was absolute pandemonium, right? It's like a war on all fronts, mixed with, magic going wild, but then there's also this gold rush of weapons and technology that everybody wants. Roving warbands carved across realms looking for storm vaults and the treasures within them. But few factions took this hit harder than the forces of the Stormcast Eternals, the God King's chosen warriors. You see, the Necroquake swept through Azir just like it did every other realm, but when it hit the Anvil of Apotheosis, which is the place where Stormcast are reforged, it caused immeasurable damage, and the stakes just jumped up high for them. So right now, Stormcast, in our story, are not being reforged, at least if they are, it's not nearly at the rate that they were. Now, at this point, when Sigmar realized what was happening, he took decisive action. Most everyone else kept to fighting whatever was right in front of them. It makes sense if you're a Cities of Sigmar and there's a whole bunch of undead at your walls. That's the only thing that you're focused on, right? But Sigmar, he has to think a little bit bigger than that, and so he commits with his boldest response yet, and he unleashes the Sacrosanct Chamber. If you're not familiar, the Sacrosanct Chamber is an arm of the Stormcast Eternals made up of wizards and mystics, and it was created for a few reasons. You see, it is the Sacrosanct Chamber who are on the eternal hunt for arcane knowledge. The singular goal is to cure the Stormcast Eternals' reforging problems, meaning that the more a Stormcast is reforged, the less and less human they are. They start to become more automatons and soulless kind of creations of Sigmar. And so the idea is we want to investigate that and put a stop to it. We want true immortality. But also, secondary, they investigate and record magics of all kinds across the realms. They also act as the foremost experts on dealing with the immaterial, meaning demons and Nighthaunt now. Things that don't have a physical substance, but magic or energy keeps them in one piece. Now, while this chamber existed before the Soul Wars, they usually manned the Anvil of Apotheosis, being able, using their magical abilities to reforge Stormcast. But they had never been dropped into the realms with such intensity. Okay, and this was Sigmar's answer to Nagash's challenge, right? The demigods of Azir brought the wrath and lightning of an angry deity back against Nagash and his Mortarchs. It's a really epic struggle, and I love it. And this notion of action and reaction is something that we're going to see again and again. Nagash drops this spell. It doesn't go off quite like he planned, but it is still truly devastating, and Sigmar responds with troops specifically good at fighting all these ghosts that were made, and so Nagash then responds again. Enter the Ossiarch Bone Reapers. Now, this entire time, just kind of step back out of the story for a hot second, Games Workshop has been releasing battle tomes for 2nd edition Age of Sigmar, and while they all have narrative ties to the events of Soul Wars, meaning like they say what was happening in them, not many of them are actually main characters in it. Like, they weren't created as a response to something that happened in the Soul Wars, but the Ossiarch Bone Reapers were, and so that's why I'm going to focus on them. You see, Nagash is a god with time. Infinite time as he sees it, because death will outlast anything. So while he did set the plan of the Black Pyramid into motion hundreds of years previously, he had a secondary plan as well. I'm not sure if this was intended to be like a plan B in case the pyramid failed, because I think he's so arrogant that he wouldn't see the possibility of failure, or if he just enjoys making doomsday events and just made multiple, in which case that's terrifying, because how many more does he have up his sleeve? But while the events of the Age of Chaos and the Realm Gate Wars were going on, Nagash was secretly building an army. Led by the incredible warrior Catacross, and given the title the Mortarch of the Necropolis, a new player entered the mortal realms. You see, the Ossiarch Bone Reapers are an army that is bent on the elimination of all life from the realms, but they do it in a very peculiar way. They collect the bones of the dead through tribute or slaughter and build new units with them. This is an army of constructs, heavily armored and built to stand toe-to-toe with the Stormcast Eternals. They aren't the ethereal ghosts of the Night Haunt, nor are they the endless yet weak masses of skeletons and zombies. These are warriors designed from soul to body for the purpose of wiping out the living. And so ultimately, the Soul Wars are a tale of Nagash reaching for the moon and landing amongst the stars. He showed his hand with the Black Pyramid and the Ossiarch Bone Reapers, but he didn't have the power or control enough to kind of do it right. And I do see the Ossiarch Bone Reapers as sort of the plan B that has a much higher chance of success now that the Black Pyramid spell failed. Partially because, the spell didn't work the way he intended to. I mean, sure, he got the Night Haunt out of it, which is another branch of an army that he now has control over, but it's a far cry from what he had planned. And then the Ossiarch Bone Reapers show up, and while they are awesome, their means by which they're going to eradicate life is very slow, marching every inch of the realms and absorbing the living and the dead into their army. It takes an immense amount of time because these settings are so large. If you'd like to learn more about the Ossiarch Bone Reapers, I did a whole week explaining how they go through that process. Go check out those videos. But towards the end of the Soul Wars, Nagash did do one thing that everyone, including myself, thought was impossible, and it was the last big note of the Soul Wars, and it comes in the book The Wrath of the Everchosen. This is a narrative campaign that details how Catacros and Lady O, I call her Lady O, Lady Ollander of the Night Haunt, march upon the 8 Points. The 8 Points is the home base of Archaon, the kind of lead villain for our story, and he runs the biggest chaos army in the realms. This is the most heavily fortified location within the Mortal Realm setting, and basically no one, including myself, thought that it could be touched. Within the 8 Points, there's a gate to each realm, and there's a fortress of mind-blowing size on the inside and outside of every one of those gates, and yet Catacros was such a renowned general, he marched upon them, right, making it as far as Archaon's own personal tower before being struck down. Now, Catacros survived the ordeal, but this was a huge achievement, because now the Mortarch of the Necropolis, and therefore Nagash, his boss, had a true foothold in the 8 Points, which is a huge deal for all parties involved, right? Nagash did what the combined forces of Order could not do. He showed that Archaon could be beaten, or at least his forces could be beaten back. Nothing is safe, right? Nothing is secure in the realms. Everything is still up for grabs. It also makes Shyish way safer because now there's not this endless stream of chaos troops pouring in through this secured gate. It's one small step towards total lockdown and security of Shyish, kind of like how Sigmar has total security in Azir. And that, my friends, are the major story beats of the Soul Wars. Right, now I have videos that cover the Night Haunt, the Ossiarch Bone Reapers, the Sacrosanct Chamber, all of those things. We've chatted about them, but I wanted to put this video out there for a brief synopsis so that you can get the main, story points, so that when this next chapter in the Age of Sigmar story comes out, the Broken Realms, you can be prepared for it. This makes it just a great jumping in point, essentially, is what I was trying to do. Now, the things that were released along with this, the Malign Portals stories are phenomenally written. They also have the new armies that came out in support of this. The ones I just listed, Night Haunt, Sacrosanct, Ossiarch Bone Reapers, all of those are awesome in their own right. They do very different things, but I love the fact that they were all a response to one another, and they're written specifically that way. Nagash did a thing, right, and that was the impetus, created Night Haunt. Sigmar had to have a response to it. Okay, well, now there's a new weapon on the table, and Nagash had to have a response to that. And so we're seeing in real time the ante keep getting raised by different parties. And I absolutely loved it. Now, as far as final thoughts and why is this chapter in Age of Sigmar history so cool, I'll be honest with you, the Storm Vault thing didn't grip me. It was kind of like a one and done supplement thing that wasn't really explored a whole lot further. It's certainly dynamic. I loved the idea of having just like, you know, mass weapons just dropped upon the realms, and it's a free-for-all. Everyone's trying to get their hands on them. But honestly, when it came to gameplay and mechanics and that kind of stuff, it kind of felt like an afterthought. But what I will say is some huge strengths of this story arc have been is that Nagash making a power play has been awesome, right? Those side factions can easily be forgotten, like death and destruction. And again, I want the same for destruction, but taking a singular character like Nagash and saying he has the power, the arrogance to achieve what he wants to do, and he may not have reached, you know, total achievement when it comes to like setting out for his goals. Like spell didn't go off right, and the Ossiarch Bone Reapers thing takes time. Like those all look like losses, but the truth is that he did some huge strides. The actions that Catacross took in Wrath of the Everchosen were monumental, because up until then the 8 points was just untouchable. It might have just been this, you know, make-believe story of just like, that's where the evil villain lives and we just don't go there, but he did. Now, he took the fort in the coolest way possible. If you want to hear that story, my coverage of Wrath of the Everchosen were quite frankly some of my favorite videos I've made recently, of just the writing was fantastic. I loved the battle scenes, and the fact that it was the first time where Death as a Grand Alliance really took the fight to chaos, right? It's not good versus evil anymore. Now there's just multiple factions with competing views on how the world should be run, basically, all on an equal footing. And I'm so excited for the next few chapters when, you know, other factions can stand up to Archaon and stand up to chaos, and we can see what the realms are like when it is truly a free-for-all, because chaos has been in ascendancy for so long. One thing I can also say about this chapter of the game and its history has been it introduced some incredible ways to play. Malign Portals was one of my favorite things, because it came at a time where not every faction had a battle tome yet, and so it just gave every army some kind of extra mechanic. Now, it wasn't widely received by people, but I thought it was really, really cool. Basically, you could scry the stars and you would get bonus things. Basically, they kind of worked like command abilities, essentially, to an extent, but you had like a resource pool and that kind of thing. In addition to that, you also had stuff like endless spells were introduced, artifacts were introduced, like Realmscape artifacts, and of course those have gone away and kind of been changed now with the current GHB, but we've had those options for some time. We also had the Storm Vault campaign system, Wrath of the Everchosen, 3 new armies, you know, Nighthaunt, Stormcast, and the Bone Reapers. This chapter in Age of Sigmar offered a lot to us as players, and I wanted to take time to acknowledge that, like, this was a fun journey, and I'm so glad I got to be along for part of it, and I'm really excited for the next chapter, and I hope that all of you will join me as we venture forth into it. So thank you all so much for watching, listening, and following along. If you have any questions or you'd like links to any of those videos or something like that, simply ask in the comments below and I will make that happen. So thank you all so much for watching, listening, and I'll catch you in my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Happy wargaming. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was made possible by the folks over here to the left. These are my top supporters over here on YouTube and on Patreon that keep this channel going. If you'd like to learn more about how to become a supporter and get some cool things in the process, like exclusive pictures and interactions with me, and get your questions answered here on the channel, go ahead and click any of the links down below or the join button on the community page over on YouTube. Regardless of your choice, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me with this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Happy wargaming.